that we are starting our last session of today's seminar. I'm really glad that all 3 or 4 of us are here now, and also we have some audience at the Institute of Lithuanian Literature and Folklore here in Vilnius. So I would like to remind you that today we have 20 minutes for the presentations and 10 minutes for the discussion, and the discussion will be after all the presentations. So don't forget your questions or your comments after all the presenters will talk. And I would like to start with Sabrina Ensfelder from the University of Antibes, and she is going to talk about memories in Trinidad Carnival and collective performances. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for welcoming me. Thank you. So I would like to share my screen. I think let me know if you can see my screen, so that would be much better. I guess you might be able to see the screen, right?
Yes, we can. You can press F5 and then we will see your also. Yeah, everything's okay.
Everything is fine. Perfect.
Yes,
thank you very much. So today I will talk about memories in Trinidad, and especially in Carnival, the Carnival of Trinidad. And I will talk also about the collective performances that we can find in Trinidad Carnival. So my presentation today will rely on 3 aspects. First of all, I would like to talk about the aesthetics in Trinidad Carnival, and we'll see how the aesthetics is related to memory and also to heritage. Next aspect, we'll talk about the public space and also related to memory in Trinidad. And the last part will be dedicated to the construction of memory, the relationship with identity, but also with business as far as Carnival is concerned. So I'll begin with aesthetics in Trinidad Carnival. So in Trinidad, art is, or I would say arts in plural, are an integral part of the nation's patrimony. And every year, the celebration of Carnival is a vibrant tribute to culture. So interestingly, the society is a multi-layered island with different ethnicities, and a memory is expressed through art with, for example, costumes, masks, or carnival characters. We also have, and I've chosen today to work also on 2 books from a Trinidadian author. The author is Lovelace, and we'll see with 2 of his books. The first one is entitled The Dragon Can Dance, and the second one is entitled It's Just a Movie. And in this, with these 2 books, we'll see that the author not only mentions facts and cultural aspects and memory related to the island, and everything is related to Carnival, but we will also see how with literature is also an artifact, is also an example of memory for the islands. This author, Lovelace, is a native born from Trinidad, but contrary to other authors, he didn't really travel. So his vision of the country, I would say, is authentic, because he doesn't have the vision of the writer who exiled, for example, and who talk about this country, or who talk about specific aspects or specific cultural aspect of this country. So we will study today these 2 books, and we will connect the books with the actual Carnival. So, and in these books, he demonstrated that we might be able to overcome problems of memory, problems of the past, problems of identity, though he also mentioned some issues related to unity, the fact that can we really talk about unity when we mention Carnival or ethnic unity, for example. So everything will lead us to questions. Also, all these aspects will lead us to question the functions of Carnival in Trinidad, in the forging of identity, but also the dangers it faces with what I would call the businessification, if I can use the word, of memory, because especially in Trinidad, though we have some steps interesting steps in improving memory with the creation of spaces for memory. We also have to face the danger of business and the influence of business in these monuments and also these cultural elements. So in the 21st century, culture and memory-oriented projects are something that governments are taken into account. They are very interested in promoting these aspects because they provide a sense of unity for the nation, but also because they represent a source of income also for the nation. So we'll see with the athletics of in Trinidad Carnival how these elements combine. And as I said, I used one of the book from Earl Lovelace. The first book is entitled The Dragon Can Dance. In this book, we follow some characters, some inhabitants of Trinidad, who are basically they are poor, but they use carnival as a way to express themselves, as a way to prove that culture is part of themselves, and as a way to show that they are part of the nation. So actually, carnival help them to become someone in the nation. So this is an extract from the book, and here we do have an example of the atmosphere that we see during these days in Carnival, and the atmosphere, but also the reference to memory, the reference to history, especially with the passage at the end of the passage. I read the end of the passage when you have the mention of the masqueraders coming, that goes back century. And also they do mention back across the Middle Passage, back across to Africa. This is just one example of the importance of some characters in Trinidad Carnival for the population, for Trinidadian population. So of course you have the mentioning of mask, you have the mentioning also of brooms and blowing whistles, beating kerosene drums that we can find also in Africa, but more likely in the Caribbean. But all these elements used in Trinidad Carnival help people to connect to their roots because of the physicality of the elements, but also because it helped them to say that actually we do have some heritage, we do have something that links us to our past. But as you might see with the title is not dedicated only to African culture. It's related to Asian culture. The title of the book is The Dragon Can Dance. The population of Trinidad and Tobago is quite mixed. We have African descent persons, we have Asian descent, Indians, we have a lot of different ethnicities. And the question that we might ask ourselves is how Carnival, for example, but also how people can connect to one identity, can make a definition, can have a definition of memory, when we speak of such a diversity. So we'll see quickly some examples of athletics in Trinidad Carnival. This is examples of dragons that you can see. You'll see in the extracts that I've taken some examples from the extract to show you that in Trinidad Carnival, you do have different types of characters. We'll see later on some maybe African characters. Here we can have Asian characters that are really part of the carnival. The book was written in 1979, and these lectures are quite recent, so the characters are still present in Trinidad and in Trinidad's Carnival, and they are an integral part of the culture. You won't see Trinidad Carnival without, for example, the dragon. So, and you can see in terms of aesthetic that people, they take their time for costumes, and you have such a diversity the celebration. This is another example that is taken from the book. The book mentions also whips. The whips might relate to Africa. We do have some celebration in Africa where they use whips. It's just maybe in some culture it was related to the fact of chasing spirits. So you see that the same artifacts are also found in Trinidad Carnival. Also, they have been adapted. So of course, people here, they use fun and they run after people in order to play, but the significance of the whip and the significance to the culture is present. In the novel as well, chapter 1, you have one character who mentions the basic idea of carnival, depending on, I mean, no matter the ethnicity, no matter the culture, saying back in Trinidad, all of we is one. So basically, this is one idea that you will find along the novel, saying that the identity of Trinidadians, whatever their different ethnicity, during this carnival, during this special celebration, is to be considered as being one. We'll see later on that unity is not that easy in the book, but even after carnival, but actually during that specific moment, we can say that memory, culture, heritage, everything combines during the festival. This is another example of the impact of and the heritage, the different characters that you'll find in Trinidad Carnival. So they mention different types of costumes. They also mention some elements. You have what they call there the jabs. That means basically the devil that we can find in European culture. They put some colors for them in Trinidad. So if you look at the carnival in Trinidad, you'll see that it's not actually red, but you'll find some blue devils, some black devils. So this is from European heritage, and they are very proud of the festival. You also have the shoes filled with pink and bells and so on. So you'll see how the characters are important, and are also with the presence of the spectators, how it seems, at least during that time, to have some unity. It seems that people share the same values during that specific time of carnival. I wanted to show you a small extract from Trinidad's carnival, and I'll try to comment it. You might see the diversity of costumes, but also of ethnicity. It was just to show you an example of the brightness and the enthusiasm that people put in carnival. You'll see how the costume are made, and also if you pay attention, you'll see that there is a bold diversity. You have different people from Indian descent, European descent, and it's a place, actually a real place. I mean, this is a real place for celebration, not only of memory, but of common culture. This will lead us to our second part. So I'll talk about the public space and memory in Trinidad and Tobago. So when we mention memory, of course, we have some specific places that comes to mind. So carnival is one example of those places where you see people coming together. But actually in Trinidad, something that is interesting is that you do have a physical place to celebrate the memory of carnival. So recently, there has been the creation of a museum of carnival, and it was created in 2021. So this is a place where people can go and they can have all information about history, the history of Carnival. You also have characters that are with their costumes, so you can definitely go there, and you can also see some performances. So this is one aspect of the Trinidad government, because this has been a long process that's only has been possible in 2021 to show to the population that memory actually is something alive, and that politics also takes part in that steps. So we do have the creation of that museum. We also had way back in 1999 the Carnival Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, also who is a center where people can get information about the carnival. But I would say that the more vibrant, I would say the more recent and vibrant creation is the museum that makes the pride actually of the country, of the island. This is an example of what you can see in this museum. So you do have costumes. You can see maybe on the wall some pictures, and it also goes over time. So you can see the progression of costumes over time, and this is just one aspect of what you can see. So this leads me to the second book I wanted to mention. Still, it's a book from Lovelace. The title of the book is just a movie. So as I said earlier, the first book, The Dragon Can Dance, was written in 1979. This book was written in 2011, so a few years later. And interestingly, in this book, Lovelace also mentions the evolution of Carnival, but also the evolution of the mindset of inhabitants of Trinidad, related as far as Carnival, but also as far as memory is related. In the first book, in The Dragon Can Dance, we had some characters struggling, but also they wanted to prove that identity was part of identity, and Carnival was part of their life actually. And also they wanted to show that they could express themselves, they could be someone from Carnival. They also showed with the character of the dragon that rebellion could lead them to a specific outcome. In this book, it's just a movie, written a few decades later. We do also talk about Carnival, but the vision is different. Here, Lovelace wants to present another side of Trinidad identity. And interestingly, is also linking it to politics, which is very interesting. And I'll try to read a short extract, not only politics, but also the fact that people want to have monuments, for example, showing their culture, showing their heritage, but physical monuments, for example. So he's talking with, so we have two characters here talking about Carnival, talking about Stillman, that is music from Trinidad Carnival, and he's talking about the impact of Calypso. And at sometimes he mentioned the fact that he wanted to have the Sphinx monument display in Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad and Tobago, at Emancipation celebration. So, and later on he's talking about history, but which people do not have a history, I asked. The colonizers did a good job on you, he replied. And in all these exchanges, I felt myself losing ground, and then ice and so on. So that's, in this book, this is very interesting because he's questioning, contrary to the other book, is questioning the cultural action of Caribbean people. So that's very interesting because we have some kind of double visions, not only the vision of the colonizer and the colonized, I would say this old vision, but we do have a new vision where Caribbean people, post-colonial people, they question themselves about their way of acting, their way of showing their culture. So the contrast is quite interesting between the two books, and we see the evolution of the ideas, especially when, as I said earlier, when we know that Earl Lovelace is an author from Trinidad, so his vision is quite, I would say, realistic. So he's given us some reality, some insights, real insights of the evolution of the mindset of the society. This leads me to my last part, the construction of memory and identity, and also the relationship with business. So when we talk about, Bakhtin mentioned the fact that carnival was a way for people to express themselves, also to be relieved from distress, for example. But when we talk about the construction of memory, the construction of identity, it's challenging to sometimes to connect memory and identity. First, because the latter, identity, is plural in Trinidad. We can't actually only speak of one identity. We have to talk about identities. And the following question, maybe how can a multicultural population be considered as one, as has been mentioned by the character earlier in the book, in the Dragon Candles, all of we is one. So is that only during a celebration such as Carnival, or is that with the help of a piece of literature like the ones offered by Earl Lovelace, or is that again thanks to the construction of the identity through media that we can consider that memory and identity are connected? So this also is interesting, because when we talk about identity, we talk about politics, and interesting in Trinidad, as said in the extract from It's Just a Movie. In this extract, and I've chosen this extract specifically because it was from a chapter entitled Victory at the Polls. It means that memory now in the 21st century, and also in a post-colonial society, is something that is related to politics. This is related to personal identity. And we can see that this extract that it's definitely linked with politics when carnival characters are used to introduce the entrance of a politician. Okay, and also it is also questioned, because characters, they do, and also people do question the real intentions of politics when they try to put forward identity, they put forward memory, they also create museum. So all of this leads us to question the real meaning of the construction of identity and of memory in Trinidad, for example. Another point is so the point of consumption. So festivals like Carnival are quite interesting, but in terms of international point of view, it can also be also raised regarding consumption. Are we not in a state of consuming? Are we not consuming the culture? It's not the culture, it's not memory used as also a good that we can consume. So these are some questions that we can ask ourselves, and when we talk about a memory in post-colonial society, and these are the questions that Trinidad and also other post-colonial islands, also country may face. So when we discuss memory and national identity, and when we analyze the place of cultural identity of memory in Trinidad, in a society that is comprised of various cultural groups, discussion on the symbolic function and also the psychological function of carnival are raised. But simultaneously, cultural diversity must also be, I would say, affirmed, also reaffirmed. when we, in such a multicultural society, in a post-colonial context, for example, however, where every community struggles and to achieve cultural and also social recognition, and there were also the attempt to break with the prevailing heritages, either of colonization or also of old mentalities, I would say. More stable foundations are needed, are necessary for an harmonious construction of nations. So undoubtedly, recognition of heritage, recognition of memory is part of the process in order to help this valorization of memory. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sabrina. It was really interesting. And now I would like to ask our second presenter, Lucia Veverchikene from Vilnius University, to go here and to talk about generation after regime change, memory work strategies, and interplay of collective and communicative memory. And as I told you before, we will have a discussion after all the presentations. Sabrina, could you please stop sharing your screen? Thank you. So hello everyone, my name is Lucia Veverchikene and I am trained as political scientist and I will present a perspective also slightly from political science view on memory and look at the way the state exercises its power to remind and also at other things. So the topic of my presentation is generation after regime change, memory work strategies and interplay of collective and communicative memory. I don't know why it should work. Okay, so here you see an illustrative picture, and it is also from my family archive. And I am a member of generation after the transformative regime change, and so it's slightly an autobiographical perspective. So what is this generation after, and why? What could it tell us about different levels of memory, primary, collective, and communicative memory? So the generation after is raised after the transformative regime change. So it's a group of people that could have different characteristics and could have different relationships to the past. However, they are applying the principle of family resemblance in some way connected. And I will present how it is and why it is a certain community of memory. And when I was observing commemorative practices here in Lithuania and in a broader region after the change from communist regime to the post-communist one to the democratic one, and when I was looking also at the literature related to generation after a change, there are at least two concerns related to this group of people. So first of all, it's a thing of transmission of memory, that something was transmitted to this group, something about the past, and we would like to know what. And there's also something about this generation will transmit to the next ones, to the upcoming ones. And another hope or expectation that relates to the generation after is change, and expectation of something better. Of dealing with the past in a better way, in a newer way, in a more fresh way. And also those transmission and change expectations, and hopes, concerns are reflected to a large extent in the literature of memory studies field and the theoretical assumptions of the authors. So if we look at the case of Lithuania, because I was researching a Lithuanian case, however, I generalized a little bit further also to the broader region. We have a specific genealogical arrangement in the society after this transformative change. We have several family generations where the youngest ones have no experience, no direct experience of the previous regime, and the older ones have different memories and have already experienced the regime and the context before the Soviet past. And so it's the specific genealogical arrangement that concerns the generation after, and also the context of how state reminds through various collective memory media about the previous regime, as it is in the case in Lithuania, but also in other countries of this region. The previous regime, the preceding regime, is viewed as occupation, first of all, and commemorated as an occupation and as a regime that was based on to a large extent, on repressions. So the general theoretical assumptions and concepts that I apply in my research, so the first one is memory work. I borrowed this concept from Annette Kuhn. However, it is widely used in the memory studies field. Also, Jeffrey Olick applies this concept when thinking of state level memory, national memory. And this memory work is a certain process of making sense of family members' experiences in the preceding regime. And this memory work is conducted by the generation after, when they somehow have to come to terms with the past that their family members have experienced, their experiences within the context of the way the state reminds about the previous regime. And why the state and the family? Because we could have different ways of getting to know the past, not only through commemorations, not only through conversations with family members. However, family and state are two important identification objects. So state, it's a large collectivity that we belong to, that we live in, and we are attached to. And the family, it relates to roots, kinship, and as Zerubbabel calls, the initial mnemonic socialization place. That's where we learn how to remember. And we are also born in a certain set of memories within the family. So as I said, as political scientist, I'm also very much interested in the way the state performs its power to remind through various collective memory media, and those media are very different. So it's commemorative practices, memorial days, state museums, different memory places. And on the other hand, we have the communicative memory at the family level. And here I apply the theoretical view of Welzer, and also from both Asmans, Aleida and Jan, and see the family, the communicative memory, first of all, at the family level as an arena where several narratives coexist, well, and memories are formed, and also as a certain content of remembering, certain content that is transferred from one generation to another. And also, as regarding the memory process within family and in the state, remembering happens in a certain context of memory policies. So how do I access the memory work and strategies that generation after applies when dealing with their family members' past experiences? I apply the general principle of narration and re-narration from Bartlett's experiments in the 1930s. And also I was highly influenced by the work of Welzer, Harald Welzer, and his colleagues on the ways the memory of National Socialism and of the Nazi time is transmitted and the way the memories are created in German families. So I look at 16 Lithuanian families of 3 generations, and I collected my data in 2018, 2020 during family conversations. And as regards those families that I was talking to and I was listening to, there was a variety of trajectories of grandparents' life histories. So from those who could be considered as the ones who suffered, deportees, the ones who were repressed, to those who lived quite a successful life in terms of professional achievements, career opportunities, access to several privileges. So there is a variety of grandparents' life histories, life experiences. So I would like to shortly present the way I gathered my data. So I had 2 steps. So the first step was actually to collect the family members into a family gathering of 3 or in some cases 2 generations, where we could have grandparents, parents, and grandchildren, members of the generation after. And I asked the oldest family member to narrate their life story. Their life stories covered the whole period of the previous regime, so the whole Soviet period. And after this narration, I asked also the parents' generation to share their memories. And at some point, the family conversation followed, but not in all cases. And after that, usually after a few days or in a week, I had a separate occasion meeting the grandchildren generation, member of the grandchildren generation, the generation after, and I asked them to re-narrate, to retell their grandparents' life story. And I also had some interview questions, semi-structured interviews that were related to the family conversations on the one hand, and I was also interested in the way the person had access to various collective memory media, museums, films, school education, the experiences of learning history and the history of the Soviet past at schools, the role of the teacher, and also in general, the trends in communicative memory, whether the family discusses issues of the recent past, or what do they talk about, what do they tend to silence, and other things. So my methodology. So I had 16 families that I was talking to. And I had a lot of rich material, rich data, and I applied the interpretive analysis of narrations and re-narrations. And I also looked not only at words and the absences, I also looked at the silences and the conversation context, the gestures, the mimics, the voice, and other things. So I was looking with the ethnographic sensibility to all those family conversations. And I was mostly interested how grandparents, how grandchildren edit their grandparents' stories. And that's where the level of collective memory interferes into the communicative memory. And how I made the interpretation, I was inferring to the best explanation. I was looking at statements or their absence, and I treated them as a result of collision or congruence of different meanings from different memory levels. So through this interpretive analysis, I extracted 5 memory work strategies that the generation after applies when making sense of their family experiences in the previous regime. And so understanding justification, attribution of new meaning, balancing the 2 meanings, or exaggeration, reinforcement. And this is a certain set of strategies. However, there could be more, but my data was to some extent restricted, and my interpretation could also have missed some of the strategies. However, these are the 5 most obvious ones. So justification is the first one I would like to present, and it applied, first of all, when family members narrated about good life, about professional success, about career opportunities they had, or access to certain privileges, or the suspected nostalgia, when grandchildren could feel that their family members, their grandparents, somehow missed that period. And that's why they had to apply certain justification means. For instance, emphasizing good qualities of their family members, their values, their fear of repressions, their measures to change the wrong system. They were also renaming or not mentioning occupation of family members. So various ways to justify why their family members had a good life and why they could miss it. And there's just one, it was a little bit difficult to translate to English. So there was one person talking about the grandfather who was the head of Colcos. And she said that I heard from family members and also from the people of our village that he was a good man. So there was a need to justify that her grandfather, who was the head of Colcos, so the Colcos is related to the all collectivization process and possibly to suffering of those who were deported from their land, and the need to justify as a good man, as a good person prevails. So another strategy, attribution of a new meaning, what I observed in the narratives, that grandchildren tend to emphasize the resistance to certain activity, to the resistance of their family members, and to attach the meaning of resistance to certain activities. And patriotism was one of the cases that patriotism was related to resistance to the previous regime. And there's something specific about also the Lithuanian terms, that there was no emphasis on conversionists, išverstas kūriai in Lithuanian language, although the grandparents emphasized those people who were communists and then converted to patriots. So attribution of a new meaning. One of the most complicated strategies apply when they talk and try to make sense of the grandparents' experiences in the context of post-war and in the context of partisan war. So I call this strategy understanding, and they are trying to actually see and to extend the roles and choices within the partisan war and the armed resistance, and the way they try to make sense of their grandparents' memories actually outlines the excluding nature of the freedom fighter occupant division at the collective memory level, where we have this strong narrative of suffering and fighting for freedom and the heroization of the partisans as well. And another thing that could be observed is the shadow of collaboration and making sure and being not sure actually whether members of family were on the right side. What if they did not support the partisans? Did it mean that they supported the occupants? So this is the shadow of collaboration, where the level of collective memory interferes. Balancing the two meanings is a strategy primarily related to the grandparents' stories about the state security structures. And the KGB and all the previous ones, the MGB and KVD in Lithuanian. So while trying to make sense of those type of stories of grandparents, they actually, on the one hand, try to emphasize the danger. And on the other hand, there is a shadow of a doubt with regard to certain files, informing processes. So grandchildren are not actually sure how to think and how to talk about this, the grandparents' encounter with the state security structures. On the one hand, there's something that was feared and there was danger in that context, but also they were not sure whether the family members were not part of the informing networks. In some families, that was really visible. And the final one, reinforcement and exaggeration, that grandchildren tend to emphasize the harm and suffering, negative experiences of their family members, such as deportations or experience repressive measures of the previous regime. So anything that is related to harm is exaggerated, is reinforced in their re-narrations. And the family members are tended to be seen as the ones who suffered more, and on the other hand, were actively supporting the aim for freedom, the struggle for freedom, even though grandparents and parents are more reserved in this case. So grandchildren try to emphasize the participation in the large gatherings of Sayudis, the independence movement, and other ways of struggling and aiming for freedom. So what do those memory work strategies tell us about the memory arrangements in the country that has experienced the regime change? I claim that they actually, those strategies allow us to understand how the memory of the previous regime is formed. And they outline the principles of this memory formation. And also in the case of changes at the structural level, and in the case of changes of memory politics, we could expect some differences in the way the family conversations are structured and also in memory work strategies of the generation after. However, we do not see any changes in our state narratives about the Soviet past. And also the situation in Ukraine does not change the memory politics that much in general. Okay, I think that's it, what I wanted to share with you. Should I stop? Oh, okay. Thank you, Lucia, for really interesting presentation. And wait a second. Okay, so we still have two presenters, and now it's the time for Trinda Varga from the Hungarian University of Fine Arts. And she's going to talk about counter-narratives of war, memory, and trauma in contemporary art. So the floor is yours. We can see your slides. If you press F5, then we can see full of it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Thank you. I will read my paper if you don't mind, because it is not so time-consuming this way. And I will talk about counter narratives of war, memory, and trauma in contemporary art. And my paper will be a few of these works. It focuses on two types of works. First is recent war memorials, which create counter narratives, and second on works that counter public or media representation of war and trauma. In the first case, the works I chose are also memorials, which have an unusual form and approach to remember history. They take one step further, the late 20th century shift from the heroic representation of war memorials. And then one is Maya Lin's, probably, it is a very well-known memorial. It is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial from 1982, and it was among the first of these counter-memorial approaches, which did not focus on the representation of heroic deeds, but on the people who suffered the miseries of war. In Lin's work, more than 58,000 half-inch high names were inscribed in the V-shaped sloping granite wall, and that's what you can see in the picture. Since then, memorials diverted from figurative representation, and that's also very important that these names that you can see could be touched, and then people could copy the names, the people whose grandchildren were visiting copied the names. So since then, memorials diverted from the figurative representation of men in war or heroes dying to a more abstract but also essential form, which usually builds on the somatic experience of the visitors. And another very well-known one is the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. And to give one Hungarian example is the memorial of the 1956 revolution, which was placed in 2006 by the Epsilon group. And then you can see that this is, it's not an aerial, so this is an aerial view, and then this is from the ground view. You could also walk in Berlin. So I turned to Jeremy Deller's First World War memorial, which reconfigures these memorials into a completely new participatory form. Participation as a genre in contemporary art is prevalent from the 1990s. The viewer or the participants interaction are involved in an interaction which itself is the unfolding of the work. In these works, the artist's role is also a non-traditional one. He is a facilitator who sets the scene, but the work is executed by the participants. Deller's First World War Memorial was playing with this format. The point here is to turn the form of remembering into a more personal experience. The work has already had an unusual title. We are here because we are here. Instead of an abstract allegory of the war or war heroes, Deller's work picked out one symbolic, well-remembered dismal event of the war, the Battle of Somme. On the first day, 1st of July, 1916, more than 19,000 men were killed. It was the worst loss in the history of the British Army. Deller's work took place on the centenary of the event from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 1st of July, 2016. The work was a national event, which with the participation of a number of organizations and theaters. The 14,000 volunteers across the 14,000 volunteer actors were dressed in First World War uniforms. Each of them were holding a card with a name, when known, and a date of death. These are the cards, and the date of death, battalion, and regiment. The volunteer soldiers were loitering around the most crowded public spaces like train or bus stations, and this is what you could see in the first or the previous one, shopping malls, or even squares. Their silent presence was so transparent, as if a strange time machine would have sent these heroes the unintended loss of thousands of young lives finally back home. The soldiers gave their cards to passerbys. The surprise on the faces, and this is one scene when the soldier gives his card to the passerby, and that's the person looking at, or after having looked at the card. So the surprise on the faces looking at the cards, and sometimes even the empathic exchange of looks, created a stronger common moment of mourning and a tribute to those passed away than I think any memorial in bronze or marble would have done. The performative work reached people directly, also the youngest generation, who tend to be less eager to visit traditional monuments. But most importantly, it did create a moment of common remembrance or past moment in of history, in which the soldiers were not only heroes, but everyday people who loved, lived, had a family, and were extremely young. The average age of the soldiers were around 18. This moment of real loss of real lives made the memory more living than any figurative or abstract piece of art, however well wrought, could have done. My other example is a Hungarian one, and this is the general title is Silenced, and the subtitle is Memory of Rape in War Times, Women as Victims of Sexual Violence. And the memorial right now is under construction, so will be open to the public next spring, hopefully. The importance of the memorial is that it brings a taboo topic into public remembrance, women raped in war times. The initial idea was to bring into light the abuse of Soviet soldiers, which were for political reasons impossible to talk about for a very long time, not only in public, but neither in most private situations. But rape is also a taboo topic because the abused women rarely talk about it due to the stigma and to the difficulty of revisiting the traumatic event. The memorial was planned to counter such silences. The curators created a website where not only the finalist proposals are uploaded, but there are interviews with a number of artists who created unconventional memorials, as well as research-based studies on different aspects of artistic representation of war crimes against women, from the Yugoslav wars to the South Korean comfort women. This provided the preparatory background for the memorial and will inform future visitors about the importance of the project. So you can see in this slide that this is a living website. Actually, if anybody is interested, I can send over the links, and then in these subtitles you can see the previous projects, and you can click on the interviews of artists. They are about an hour and recorded, and also you can see the studies which are published in a book format in here. And this is a living website. And the winning, so we do not have the memorial, but we do have the maquette of the proposal. So the winning memorial proposal is an open structure built into a vacant lot. The walls are doubled. The two walls enclose a smaller corridor. So you can see here the smaller corridor that you can walk. This is the place of solitude and mourning, whereas the inner wall onto which poems are inscribed, so the pink wall, it gives place to the poems, and then you can see that the creators are an artist, an architect, and a poet and writer. So it's a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk as well. So the inner wall onto which poems are inscribed surrounds a garden, the garden of healing, and there will be a real garden with trees and plants and healing plants as well. The memorial itself is not particularly revolutionary in form, yet its importance is to create a spatial and somatic experience. It proposes a way to experience the unspeakable. Its narrative is not a discernible one, but the somatic experience of walking or meditating in the garden or reading the scattered poetic inscription work together on a level that thwarts any specific narrative line. Yet the unspeakable can be remembered, mourned, and worked on without re-traumatizing the visitors. And there's also a Facebook page where the curators upload either talks or information which are very important from the aspect of rape or violence against women. And this is one about the Ukrainian war, claiming that it is used, so rape is used in the Ukrainian war as a strategy as well. Okay. I turn to the second part of my paper now. The second part of my paper directs attention to artworks which deploy the amalgamation of visual and verbal narrative to bring recent war trauma closer to the public. These are Omer Fast 5,000 Feet is the Best and Harun Farokhi Serious Games. They try to counter media representation and place these traumatic events back into the public and collective memory where it belongs. Farokhi's and Fast videos deal with the silenced aspects of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Farokhi focuses on the deployment of virtual reality in training and trauma work of soldiers, whereas Fast examines the role of drones in the war zone and its consequence on the formerly denied and silenced PTSD of drone pilots, as well as the mistaken toll of innocent Iraqi or Afghan lives. Fast Film is a 30-minute one-channel video installation played in a loop. Although the film is based on a thorough research, primarily on interviews with ex-drone pilots living in the United States, it is not a documentary. He chose to place the occurrence of the interviews into a fictional framework. In fact, this video plays with a multiplicity of narrative frames, which is reinforced by the video loop. The film's opening scene, and that's what we see, which is the frame of the stories told within, is a dialogue between two men. The setting seemingly is a hotel room. The two characters are a former drone pilot and a journalist who's sitting in the chair opposite the camera. We soon learn that nothing is really what it seems. A few lines in their dialogue is repeated 3 times in the film, embedding the inner fictional stories narrated by the ex-drone pilot. The lines are the following. So what? So what's the difference between you and someone who sits in an airplane? Nothing, we do the same job. But you are not a real pilot. So what? You are not a real journalist. As the film's narrative unfolds, it becomes less and less clear if it is an interview or a therapy. And if the room is in a clinic or in a hotel room where the ex-drone pilot works as a guard. The setting parallels what the film stages. You see absolutely clearly from 5,000 feet through the drone camera, even the brand of one's shoes, yet you cannot be absolutely certain what really is happening. Whether the people you see are terrorists with military intentions or local citizens doing their everyday businesses. The drone pilot makes a decision also under pressure from other military sources, and unlike in a video game, a mistake here demands innocent lives, not to mention that any fired missile means lives. The nightmares come after the first few combats. They sneak into the dreams. Only at first it seems like a video game, played from the home country. But most of these young soldiers were gamers, but it is a real war with real missiles, real losses, and real places. Omar Farr's ways of narrating pinpoints this problem of blurring reality with fiction. His fictitious characters talk about reality, a reality of the drone pilots, which was silenced or denigrated for a long time after the first PTSD cases appeared. Claiming that they are not real pilots, they are not in a war zone physically, so they cannot have PTSD. As teacher Demos notes, I quote, Fast draws on this relation of mediatized distance and actual violence and death to create a video that blurs the division between reality and representation, end of quote. This is where art counters official media and military communication. The embedded fictional stories point to another aspect of this boundary crossing between fiction and reality. The visual and verbal narrative do not always match, enhancing the uncertainty of deciphering what in fact the story points at. Moreover, he inserts CCTV camera or drone camera recordings into the visual narrative. On the one hand, this points at the omnipresent surveillance system of contemporary life, both in war and in public citizenship. On the other hand, this unclear staccato-like narrative of the embedded stories evokes the feeling of trauma narrative, reminiscent of therapy talk. One embedded story is about a man who dreams of being a train driver, but instead of getting trained, he learns by watching. Till one day, he sneaks into his favorite train line and drives the train all day. Here, the images often shown through CCTV cameras. And that's the train driver. The second is about a couple who rob people in Las Vegas, setting up a fake scene in which the woman pretends to offer a one-night stand to her and her partner plays the role of the angry husband who returns to the room unexpectedly, and then they throw out their victim from the hotel room and copy his car details. So that's the second story. Both stories suspend reality and fiction. The third and longest is a journey of a suburban middle-class US family outing, which soon turns out to be also fictional. The family arrives to a checkpoint by their station wagon, where the soldiers are Asian. Then the road leads to rural land that can also be in Afghanistan, when they encounter a group of men It is not clear what these men are doing. Suddenly the camera position switches to drone perspective. We can see the military data and the two perspective alternates. So we can see both perspectives alternating. When the missile's noise becomes audible, it's too late to escape. There is a third level of embedded narrative in the video, that of the drone pilots talking about his experiences, and his face is blurred out. The visual narrative of this story reinforces the drone pilot's account. Although from 5,000 feet you can see clearly, it's not always clear what exactly is happening. Both the group of men and the accidentally bypassing family members are killed, and their bodies will never be buried. And the last is Fast's video, and his video also claims to change perspective and bring the war home, like Martha Rosler's pieces. What seems to be justified in faraway place does not seem possible in US territories, yet the deployment of drone pilots is actually happening in US territories. Just like, so it was still about Fast. So what seems to be justified in a faraway place does not seem possible in the United States territories, yet the deployment of drone pilots is actually happening in US territories, just like the trauma is a real war zone trauma. Both were hidden from public view for a long time. Fast attempting to disclose all these anomalies without risking his interviewees. His choice of fictional form, moreover, provides the possibility to talk about reality without the rigid voice of documentaries. In fact, that the UK screening is in the UK, when it was screened, the screening took place in the Imperial War Museum, and that was a very self-critical gesture from the part of the curators about the UK's role in the Iraqi war. And usually these films are presented in museum settings. So the last one is Harun Farokhi, and whereas Fast focuses on drones, Harun Farokhi's fortunate video installation, Serious Games, gives account of the military use of VR technology. So that's another technology that migrated into military use. This film also addresses the slippage between fact and fiction in the management of war. In his film, the power of the images do not derive from surveillance or CCTV or drones, but by the immersion of VR technology. The capacity of visuality is to enclose spectators in virtual worlds. Farokhi's work explores how such mode of entertainment can migrate to the realm of war. The film presents the creation of VR imagery, which is used for training soldiers as well as for their PTSD psychotherapy. The VR designers are also soldiers, so that we can see that on the right-hand side, these soldiers are actually the designers of the VR technology, and then on the left, you can see the actual image that they create. So they create VR images according to previous war experiences described by soldiers. The training parallels the therapy. Both employ the same images. The part entitled Immersion presents a footage from a therapy for Iraqi veterans suffering from PTSD. In this therapy, a soldier recounts a traumatic experience of the war. And on the right, we can see a side, on the left, we can see a side. On the left side, we can see the screen where the virtual reality images try to follow his narratives. And the problem is that these can never capture the vividness of the description. So this is also the place where you can see he's recounting his traumatic experience, and the psychotherapist is trying to manipulate the VR images to capture what he's describing. But that's it's a very reduced imagery here. David Joseliot notes, I quote, that this sentence goes to the heart of the ethics of images in wartime. The managers of conflict work hard to keep civilians and soldiers alike in the image. And he adds that, I'm sorry, I have to show another image. So what's happening here is that the person, while recounting his story, that was so traumatic, feels very sick, and that you can see that he wants to skip the VR because he feels really sick and re-traumatized, and then the doctor tries to keep him in the image, and in the end the doctor says that I had difficulties keeping him in the image, and that's a problem. What usually media representation does with citizens, that they try to keep us in the right image of the war. And so what David Joselit adds, I quote, is that one way artists have challenged this situation or a saturation, authorization, and immersion of war images is to bring little known or difficult to access information about the Iraq conflict into the relatively free public sphere of the artwork. So just like for fast video, Haruki's is also an attempt to narrate and make public matters of common concern about war and its traumatic consequences on both civilians and soldiers that are rarely given account of in general media. And that's what I would like to finish my my talk with. So what is really important in these two last ones is that they can make events that are silenced public, because art is relatively free, and not like media, which is highly manipulated in most of the countries, especially in wartime. Thank you for your attention. And
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tunde, for your presentation. So now we have some time for the discussion, because I read that Nina left for her lecture. So are there any questions? If not, I have one. At first, I will start with one, and then we can, I hope that we'll have a discussion. So first, thank you very much for all your fascinating presentation. It was really, really interesting. And my question at first is for Lucia. I would like to ask you about the tension between the family narratives and a common or a public opinion about these narratives. Do you see any differences or difficulties between them? Please come here, because I will, the presentators won't hear you.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. And what I observed also in my research, that already the sharing of memories in the family setting, already the conversation of 3 generations is somehow related to the general meanings that are like circulating to the state narratives. They are already shaping the scene where family memories occur. And I think it would be a bit different if I would observe, let's say, a conversation between 3 members of grandparents' generation who will, let's say, were working in the same Holocaust. So that would be a little bit different than when they're sharing their memories with the children and grandchildren. So I think that the way families remember as a group is already somehow shaped by the general official narratives in the state. But whether there are too many tensions, I think that all those good experiences are somehow, they tend to redefine them and to somehow fit into this occupation, resistance, and fight for freedom narrative. And I think, yes, on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're also feeling members of families. So they have some loyalty ties with the experiences of their grandparents and parents. And that's why I think that it's a very specific community of memory. It's a generation after, because it is restricted in so many ways. First of all, as members of a family with whom they tend to identify, with whose past they tend to identify, and on the other hand, as members of large community of state and trying to adapt to those memories. So I think that there's not much place for a change or for a new perspective, because they are restricted. But that's the generation after. I think that the next generation will be different again.
Good, thank you. And
Yeah.
and I also have a question for you, Tunde. You were talking a lot about contemporary art, but I want to shift a little bit to the media and to the ideas about. Oh, I see. Mirta has a question, so I will read it. Thank you for your interesting presentations. I have a question for Mrs. Ensfelder. During the carnival, sharing the collective memory of slavery and the middle passage is possible through the community unison. Are other aspects of the slavery-related past in Trinidad Carnival? I hope that Sabrina is still with us because she said, but I do my best to connect it to answer questions in chat. So I'm not so sure if Sabrina, are you still here with us? Or you left for, okay, I think she left for her lecture. So I think, Mirta, that she will answer you directly if she can. So still, I would like to go back to Tunde and to ask you, oh yeah, she's there, so you can see her answer. So okay, so Tunde, I would like to ask you about the media and about the post-war trauma in media. Do you see the differences or the similarities between how the contemporary art shows the post-war trauma and how the media shows it? Are there any tensions, differences or something?
In the general media, there's almost nothing about the post-war, I would say. There was a documentary about women raped in the Second World War by Soviet soldiers, and the problem was with that film, and it got a lot of criticism, that it showed very naturalistically the rapes, so they were played, reenacted by actors, and there was a media outrage about the film, and here the society is very divided politically. So those who are right-wing were a lot more backing that film with the representation that the soldiers were causing a lot of problems for us. Those on the left are actually protecting the Soviet part as well, because it was also liberating Hungary from the Nazi Germany. So that's also a problem that we are. So the right wing is more in tune with this kind of, I wouldn't say Nazi regime, but there's kind of an idealistic created history. It's very difficult to, I'm trying to avoid using very harsh expressions. And the media is very nicely balancing between this kind of rich past we are building our collective memory on, collective historical memory on. So there's a debate which goes among the intellectuals, but I wouldn't say that it's very open for the public. And the importance of this war memorial, women rape, is it is a memorial which will involve people. So the visitors, it will be very difficult to avoid because it's a garden. And so the people go into the garden, then they face what there actually is commemorated. And then the way they try to balance is, it is not a Soviet memorial. It is not it's not a Second World War memorial. It is a memorial that commemorates all women raped in wars. And then we can think of the ex-Yugoslav wars, which is really important, but now we learn about the South Korean women. Actually, there's a recent documentary about that case as well. And then, of course, a lot of memorials as well. So I do hope that this will initiate, and once it is there, once it is open, it will initiate a lot more talk about the Second World War in Hungary, also in the media.
But do you see the difference between the war when Russia started the war this year in Ukraine? Do you see the difference in Hungary that the media changed the opinion or the way to think about that post-war period?
No.
Not at all.
No. No, and then what's problematic is that we kind of, I would say the politics are kind of backing Russia. Not directly backing, but our prime minister says that it's not our war, so it's better not to take part with the EU, which is highly problematic. So it is really there's not much representation about it either. So on this Facebook side that belongs to the memorial, you see a lot more information about those questions and re-evaluating Second World War in the light of the question of the Ukrainian war than in the general media, which is highly problematic.
Indeed. Maybe somebody from the audience. Okay, so it's a bit late, and so thank you very much for coming. Thank you all for the presentations. And
can I have a note to Sabrina? Maybe she gets it.
Yeah. If she, I think she can answer to you, but just via chat.
Yeah. There was about this carnival culture at the Venice Biennale. I don't remember which Venice Biennale, but the Trinidad exhibition was dealing with the carnival culture, and they placed it into the context of Bakhtin, the carnival, the idea of Bakhtin's carnival, and then they say that this is a cultural memory and also a kind of revolution against the colonial past. So they show that what culture they built up for themselves, which are fascinating. So really, thank you, Sabrina. I was really happy to see again that kind of representation. That was, thank you.
Thank you, Tunde, for your comments. So at last, thank you all for coming, and see you tomorrow. Because we have a full day of the presentations tomorrow as well. So please come to meet us online. Oh, but still, thank you once again. Have a good evening, I hope that you will have, and see you next time. Bye.